Because most people make the wrong decision, not because they don't have all the options or they don't know the options are there, but because nobody actually explains how to think it through. And I'm going to be honest with you. There's no right answer that fits every unique situation. It completely depends on your situation. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a real framework for figuring out which one makes the most sense for you. So let's jump into it. I want to introduce you to a concept I like to call the seller's compass. This helps to decide where you go and which direction might be best for you. Encompasses three different things. The first is going to be price, right? This one says, hey, I want to get the maximum dollars out of my purchase when I sell my home. Speed. I need to sell and I need to sell fast, maybe like yesterday, right? And certainty. That means once you get under contract, you know it's going to close. All three of these factors are things you can get on the real estate market. And I know the temptation is, hey, Carlos, I like price, speed, and certainty. Give me that. But the reality is you can only get 2 out of 3 things. Trying to get all 3 is possible, but highly, highly challenging. For example, price. Getting you the maximum price might slow down the sale. Getting the maximum price on market may create some uncertainty. You may be worried about if that offer is going to close or how that inspection goes. And speed, you need to close, and you need to close very quickly because you've got an urgent matter you need to free up some capital for. Whatever the case is, these are the 3 factors out there. And it's not me giving you a hard time or trying to back you into a corner. It's simply the way that real estate works. And once you understand that, you're actually, instead of being in a worse position, you're actually in a more powerful position because you can begin to decide which 2 of these 3 things are most important to you, and that begins to guide you in a certain direction. So let's get into that cash offer. A cash offer is built mainly on speed and certainty. That speed comes in the way of you can close within 14 days, it's an as-is purchase, and you have a lot less drama on that one. No open houses, no showings, no inspection and wondering if you're going to come back with a repair request or things begin to fall through. That's one of the beauty of it. That certainty, you know when it's going to close, and you can even pick your own date. Sometimes you can even stay for a little while after you get a portion of your money as well, resulting in that certainty and that speed that kind of lets you solve an immediate problem in the most efficient manner. So, man, Carlos, this sounds wonderful. What's the trade-off? Well, the trade-off's going to be price. Whenever you get a cash offer, there's a lot of risk baked into it. Every property has a gift, an issue that's unseen or unknown. That risk has to be baked into that number and that offer when it's given. And I'll include myself in that one as well. I try to be very straightforward with folks that not always is a cash offer the right scenario. We'll dig into that a little bit more later and get a little closer, and I'll give you some real world scenarios. So there are also different types of cash buyers. So there are local guys who are cash buyers, and I try to be very straightforward and direct with you. And then there are some large scale folks who lock these properties up sight unseen. You've never seen the property. And then when they come into the property, they renegotiate after you're already under contract. It's important to know who you're working with and what to expect from them. So those are things that you need to be, knowledgeable about as you go through the process. The application of knowledge is power. So make sure you leverage this information that we're sharing with you. The MLS and listing on market, it is built for price. The whole goal of the MLS is to give you the maximum exposure to retail buyers. Retail buyers, they don't buy with data, they buy with love, right? And love can get you into a bidding war, and multiple offers are a real thing with a properly priced and staged property. So, maximum price, MLS. You fired up? You excited so far? Carlos, I love that. I've always wanted to sell my house for more. Absolutely. But let's talk about a few things that agents don't always discuss. Speed. It's probably going to take you a while just to get that property up on the market and listed. I know that sometimes it can take you a little while just to get the sign in the yard, to get everything set up. In addition to that, you're going to have to deal with multiple showings, folks in and out of your house, open houses. If you live in that house, they may ask you to leave each and every time that the property is being shown. You may also have to improve the condition of that. The MLS does not like as is transactions as much as an off-market transaction does. So the cost of that can be in that speed. And let's also talk about something nobody likes to discuss. Just because it goes under contract does not mean it will close. You've got inspections, you've got appraisals, you've got a buyer trying to get their financing together. Any one of those hurdles can fall through. So think of this as an Olympic sport, but instead of it being the 100 meters where you're just flat out, you're actually going to have to jump over hurdles successfully and navigate each of those in order to get you that price that you want. And then sometime at the end of it, you find out that your goal was not met because the market didn't bring it to you or deliver it. And the market gets to decide what your property sells for, not your agent. Also want you to be very mindful of those diagrams. So while you get maximum price, speed and certainty are going to be a challenge on the MLS. But knowledge and the application of knowledge is power. So now that you know about the seller's compass, you can decide which three of these factors are most important and most critical to you to help you make the best decision about the way to sell your property. I'm going to talk about something that very few people talk about. Everybody talks about what your house sells for, but nobody actually talks about what you take or your seller net, what you walk away with. I'm going to break that down and I'm going to throw you some numbers out there. Keep in mind these numbers are only an example. This is for an illustration. You know, if you want the real numbers for your property, you need to have a real conversation. I'm just giving you an overview because very few people look at the difference between a traditional listing and a cash offer and how those two numbers compare. So let's run it down a little bit and I'll try to break these down as much as I can. If you do have some questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below and we'll be glad to clarify. So for this example, we're going to use a house that's going to be $400,000. So you're listing the house at $400,000. The next thing you got to factor in is commissions. These are the fees from your agents as well as the buyer agents. These are the folks who are actually bringing you the buyer for your property, as well as doing all the other things, putting up your signage, marketing the property, driving those open houses, doing all those additional things for that one. So 6% on this particular transaction is going to come out to a roughly about $24K. Now, in order to prepare your property for listing, you may need to do some things, need to improve some landscaping, may need to throw a fresh coat of paint on, maybe carpet needs to be swapped out, maybe improving the flooring. For our example, I'm just going to put a rough figure in there, roughly about $20,000. That number could increase or decrease depending on the condition of your house. I've seen people spend more and I've seen people spend less. Keep in mind, if you spend less on prep and repairs, this number may often soften and we may end up with a price reduction that we'll talk about as well. So in addition to while you're listing this property, you got carrying cost. I'm going to use carrying costs for approximately 90 days. Those holding costs or carrying costs that you'll see, I'm basing them on a home that's about $250,000 with a 7% interest rate, assuming they paid down something on the $400,000 value or the house was purchased and then has appreciated along the way. So roughly for this one, we're going to end up with about $9,000 in carrying cost. So closing cost. Now, when you have closing costs, the closing costs on a traditional listing or transaction are split equally between the buyer and the seller. That's taxes, that's recordation. Maryland has some fees in there as well. So these are just the cost of selling a property in the state of Maryland. For our figures, we're going to run this number in at about $4,000. So then we have a price reduction risk. Say this, you listed this thing for $4,000, but it's not moving quite the way you want. We're in a fairly competitive market and we're seeing a lot more price reductions. We'll keep this one reasonable, but a meaningful price reduction in order to bring additional attention to your property. In this case, $5,000. Now this one won't have a dollar sign built to it, but time is money and it is a factor. I'm going to factor in, just like I did for the carrying cost or holding cost, I'm going to factor in roughly 12 weeks on this transaction. With 12 weeks on the market, you know, that might be 30 days on there, 45 days on there, an additional 30 days after you're under contract, and contracts can fall through, so that number could increase or decrease based on your unique situation. So after we break all these things down, this number roughly nets you about $338,000. Now, listing this on the market is always going to be your highest and best. Now, if you were to do a cash offer, let's switch up and take a look at that side. Each one has its pros and cons, and you'll begin to see that. A cash offer is typically going to be lower. I know everybody would like the cash offer that matches the listing offer, but very few investors are going to pay for that difference. Plus, they've got to factor in the risk their holding cost, and the repairs. So some of these things are baked into this number. On this example, let's use a figure of roughly 300,000. Some of you said 300,000, I'm already checking out. Hang on, wait for it. Let's break these down and see how we actually look on the bottom line. So with a cash offer, no commission because you're working directly with the buyer themselves. You may have that if your property is listed on the market, you may have one side of that, so approximately 3% for that seller's commission. But if you reach out and this is an off-market transaction, it's not listed, there would be no closing cost. Prep and repairs. Cash offers are as is, so that is also zero. Carrying cost, you don't have any because this transaction is going to close much more quickly, as I'll show you. So very little closing cost, if any. Seller closing costs, also baked into a cash offer number, is closing cost. So there are no closing costs, so another zero. Price reduction risk, once you're under contract, you're good to go with that one. There is no price reduction risk. Now, 12 weeks, as we talked about with the cash offer, let's go with 2 to 4 weeks. So your potential net in this case is what you started with, roughly 300K. So you can see that, yes, the listing price is definitely going to be higher, but it's much closer than you initially started out as you begin to factor in those costs. And we didn't even factor in fully the cost of time. We did talk about holding costs, but there's a lot of uncertainty and risk. So from our seller's compass that we brought up earlier, what are the wins on the listing side? I think that's pretty easy. I would clearly say that was going to be price. The MLS will bring you your highest and best offer because you're putting it out to the widest pool of buyers. And these buyers are buying more so on emotion rather than data or looking at your home as an investment. The wins on the other side are going to be speed and certainty. So both speed and certainty. Got a much faster transaction. In as little as 2 weeks after title is cleared, you also know what that number is going to be. So a lot less stress and anxiety, no nail biting, no price reductions, nothing of that. As we take a look at these numbers are much closer than we initially anticipated. Don't get me wrong, the delta between these two is not nothing, right? And as we said, a listing is always going to bring you highest and best. But if you're worried about holding carrying costs, and if time is a factor, if these two things are important to you, time, carrying costs, and you want to eliminate some of these other fees and some of the other risks, then the cash offer may be more attractive. So now that you have that information, you can make the best decision for you. Keep in mind, these numbers are just for illustration. Your numbers will vary. Real numbers need a real conversation. Got questions about this? Drop them in the comments below. Let me know what your questions are, and we'll do our best to answer those or try to clarify any of the math. We went through this rather quickly, kind of to make it fast rather than going deep and breaking out an entire sheet that broke down the full listing cost. But these numbers are not as far apart, and each one has its benefits depending on your unique situation. And here's where I'll tell you a little bit about how I approach this differently. Most agents only understand the on-market side of things, and most investors only understand the off-market side of things. I operate in both. I'm a licensed agent, and I buy properties through my investment company. So when you come to me with a situation, I'm not defaulting to one answer because that's all I know. I'll take a look at both options side by side. I run the actual numbers, and I tell you honestly what I think makes the most sense for your situation, even if that means I'm not the one who ends up on the other side of the deal. There is no one-size-fits-all approach in real estate, and anyone who tells you otherwise is probably oversimplifying it or something else. If you want to talk through your specific situation and what your home's actually worth and what both paths look like and what the numbers say, drop a comment below or reach out directly. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. No pressure, no obligation. And if this gave you a better way to think about it, share it with someone you know who's going through the same exact thing. It might be exactly what they needed to hear.